I mean, I still do think that local news is a really great place to start out because you have so many more opportunities to do so much more. I mean, if you're working in a small place that's understaffed, they will just throw anything and everything at you and basically say yes to anything you pitch because they need to fill the pages.
Dave Bolger here, and welcome to Had I Known, an exploration of the Hamilton College experience. This week's guest is Washington Post reporter Antonia Farzan, class of 2011. All right, welcome back to another one. Glad to have you on board again for another great conversation. We're going to try and do something a little bit different in this episode. If you follow the show on social media, at Had I Known Show. You saw this week we made a call for input, suggestions, entries for anyone in the Hamilton community who is a musician. So obviously one way we showcase the incredible, diverse talent that exists in the Hamilton community is through these conversations. But thinking about other ways we can do that, I thought back to my conversation with Jess Klein and then the following week sharing one of her songs. And then just started thinking what other music is out there in the Hamilton community. And the response has been great. So we're going to start doing that at the end of the show. In addition to the great music that we have every week from Doc Woods, we're going to highlight a different song from a different member of the Hamilton community. So stay tuned at the end of this episode for the start of a new feature. All right, this week's conversation. You know, I spend probably far too much time every morning poring over the latest COVID data. Case counts, death toll, hospitalization rates. Not the most uplifting way to enjoy your morning cup of coffee, but I've gotten sucked into doing that. And I may have this week's guest to blame for that. Antonia Farzan, class of 2011, is a reporter for the Washington Post, and her focus is on the pandemic. It was an interesting conversation with Antonia. You know, I went into it with the clear expectation of what I thought she was going to say her path was from Hamilton to the Washington Post, and as is usually the case, I was wrong, and the path was not what I expected, and quite interesting. Last week we talked to a classics professor. This week we talked to a classics major. It was a good conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Here is my conversation with Antonia Farzan, class of 2011. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi.
How are you?
Good.
So where are you holed up during these crazy times?
I'm in Rhode Island, which is where I am originally from and where my parents live. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Okay. Are you normally in DC or are you just?
Yeah. So right. So I was based in DC and then I came up here. I've been here since May sometime. My boyfriend and I, he also went to Hamilton, and we've just been kind of like, we're trying to like move up. We're working on kind of moving up here full time. So yeah, we've just been kind of hanging out in my parents' house.
So I normally, start a conversation in these days with talking about how this pandemic has impacted people's work. But it certainly has impacted your work.
It is my work.
It is your work.
It has become my work. Yeah, I would say. So it has impacted it in all the ways.
Not something I imagine you planned on covering when you got into journalism, huh? Oh, maybe it was.
No, not at all. I mean, it was definitely not something that was on my radar. I mean, much respect to the like science reporters who were like warning about like pandemics many years ago, because that was like so far. I mean, yeah. I am not a health and science type person. I mean, that's never been my skill set. It still isn't now. So it's definitely very outside my realm of expertise. But I think I've been kind of trying to look more at kind of like the, I mean, when you have something that's kind of affecting everybody's life, just all the different aspects of life that are being interrupted, more kind of the cultural, like social political aspect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
And just even kind of like some of the obscure, like weird unintended consequences,
What are some of those consequences that you've been uncovering?
I don't know if I've uncovered anything myself, but just kind of seeing some interesting stuff. I mean, one thing that I remember seeing a few months ago, actually, that I thought was really interesting. The Wall Street Journal was actually the one who came out with this. Lumber sales have been way up,
Mm,
and everybody kind of, which was one of those things which was kind of the opposite of what everybody expected. But partially it was, people like doing all these home DIY projects, but also all these restaurants that now need outdoor seating areas had to
right,
get wood to make them. So
right.
all of a sudden, like, and even now, like into the fall, there's like this crazy lumber boom. Like there have been lumber shortages. So I kind of just love like coming across just some really random, unexpected.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also,
Huge run on picnic tables for
yeah,
restaurant.
yeah, totally.
And then people just sitting at home, stuck at home, being like, "Man, this room is tiny. I need a bigger
Yeah,
room."
I'm gonna build a shelf or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah, all the people getting projects done. Yeah, and I think also some of the stuff where it's like the people predicted early on didn't come true. Like there's actually a report out of Massachusetts a few weeks ago. I think I can't remember now what journal was published in, but basically, there've been all people worried that there are going to be higher suicide rates with increased isolation, and basically what these researchers found, at least for Massachusetts, was that didn't happen at all.
Mm, mm.
So I don't know, whenever you have something that you're not expecting, especially because at this stage now it's been, God, I think I've been exclusively covering this since, how many months is it? Since March, 8 months now.
Yeah.
So whenever you see something that's actually surprising, as opposed to just kind of like more of the same thing, that's kind of exciting.
Right. As you've been covering it for these 8 months, as you sit here today, is there anything that surprises you today based on where we were 8 months ago when you were looking at this?
It's funny. At this point, I almost find it kind of nostalgic to look back. Like, I suddenly just remember the other day when I was out walking with my parents' dogs, how there was this phase very early on where people were kind of afraid of touching each other's dogs because they
Yeah,
thought that might be kind of dangerous. And I had just forgotten all about that. So it's amazing just to think how much we've learned just in that short time,
sure.
and how behaviors have changed. And I think, I've been looking more at what I've been looking more at how it's approached people's lives. At least that's more what I was doing early on. It wasn't like any like definitive take about
Right.
like this is good and this is bad. It's kind of nice to sit back and let the experts have their opinions.
What's been amazing to me is if you think back to
Mhm,
those early days when panic was high, right? And the measures people were taking. I mean, I remember we were wiping down every single
mhm.
grocery with bleach wipes, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
ruining food in the
wiping on the
process
mail. Yeah,
because we didn't know wiping on the mail
yeah.
exactly. And you look at where the numbers were back then to where they are today and continue to grow every day.
Mhm,
And that panic isn't there. In fact, it's quite the opposite for a
mhm.
good portion of the country. It blows my mind.
Yeah. I also found it very funny how, like, in the first week of lockdown, people were going on Twitter and were like, oh my God, I'm like talking to my plants, like all this stuff. They're being so dramatic. I was like, you've been inside your house for like a day. What are you talking? Like, everybody buying. I want to know. This is what I really want to know, because I am a vegan. I eat a lot of beans. I want to know what happened to all the beans because everybody stockpiled beans. And people have not been eating all those beans,
Right.
right? Like,
Right.
everybody who's panic buying, like, I will take that stuff off their hands.
That's a good point. It's a very good point.
I feel like there's a bean surplus in America that we're not talking about.
We got to find it.
Yeah,
Well,
I would personally like to find it.
I think we found your next investigative piece.
Yeah, where are the beans?
Where are the beans? I like this.
A Washington Post investigation. I'll get right on that.
Did you ever think that covering something as fairly straightforward, at least in terms of facts and data as a pandemic, would also turn into a political story as well?
Hmm. I mean, I guess it's not really surprising. Yeah, I don't know. I really kind of had no way to conceptualize this. I mean, I think what's mostly just surprising is that it's lasted for so long and it's become such a consistent part of life. I mean, I think I saw like a hilarious tweet like a few months ago that was somebody who was talking about how early on they were like, okay, looks like this is serious. Time to buy exactly one mask, which is exactly what I did. It was like, oh, I'll just get this 3-pack and I'll be like all set. Like,
Right.
this should be done soon, kind of.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so I think I guess it's not really surprising to me that it has gotten so polarized when you have something that a lot of people thought would just be a very kind of quick, like, oh, we'll take care of this and it'll be over. And now it's still dragging on and obviously having like really devastating effects on the economy. Yeah. I don't know. That's an interesting question.
There's the political nature of this
Mhm.
story is that is that a factor in any of your coverage? Is there a thought of, I got to make sure that people understand that this is real, or are you just
Hmm.
presenting the facts as they are?
I don't necessarily, I guess I tend to assume that somebody's coming for that coverage anyway is on board with it being real, but I
Sure.
do feel the part of what makes it hard is so often when you're writing stuff, you have to like be constantly contradicting. Like you have like one line that's like, this person said this thing, and then you have the next line that's like, in fact, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, blah, blah. You know what I mean? You have
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
like just today I was writing about, this was an example actually with a hospital CEO out of South Dakota who, so not even a politician, but he basically was like making a bunch of like comments about how he like had already gotten sick, so like now he didn't have to wear a mask. So with something like that, then you have to take all this time being like, well, actually, like this isn't settled. So I think I spend more time doing that kind of like sort of rebutting stuff and being like, we actually don't know this, or this is actually the official advice on this, than as opposed to trying to persuade. I will say, I mean, I've been working on the live update or live updates file, which is a thing you kind of see when you go to the homepage where I'll have little timestamp entries and say live coverage of the coronavirus.
Yep.
And that's one of the few things that's available to non-subscribers, like anything that you like, it's not paywalled at all.
Yeah.
So I do feel like that potentially plays an important role in that people who are not already paying for a subscription and maybe are not Washington Post readers are going there. So potentially you have a broader readership
Right.
than some of the other stuff we're publishing.
And you hope people go to things like that and see where this thing is headed from a numbers perspective,
right,
and stop belly aching about where they're going to be for Thanksgiving or who's going to be at the Thanksgiving table. And let's try to, control the spread of this thing, because it's getting crazy.
Yeah. I will say, I do feel like focus has kind of shifted back more. Like during the election, it kind of felt, which, like, I mean, I guess we're still sort of in election coverage, but it did feel for a while leading up to that, like we were kind of screaming into a void.
Mm-hmm.
And now it does feel like maybe kind of people are like, okay, that's over. I'm going to go back to paying attention to what's happening.
Right. It feels to me, and maybe
now.
this is part of the covering this, is that early on there was a lot of focus on the effects of being sick with this virus, right? What happens if you need a ventilator, need to go on oxygen, and then as the numbers waned and attention started to go away, because we as a people have a short attention span, you didn't hear any of that. And early on, when the numbers started to go back up about a month ago, let's say, you still didn't hear that. You heard the numbers going up, but you didn't hear about people getting sick. And I think it was Rachel Maddow last night talked about her partner's ordeal with it, and some other people have been talking about it. I feel like that starts to sink in with people more when you personalize what it's like to not be able to breathe and so forth. So people understand that this isn't just part of a number game that somebody else is a part of. That there's real people getting really sick and dying from this, and maybe as the attention sort of shifts back to it, those types of stories will start to sink in with people.
Yeah. I mean, I know just for me personally, I'm not someone who is really a numbers person. So when I see a number, it's very hard to conceptualize it. And I think there's a statistic I saw the other day. I think, I hope I'm getting this right. I think it was that the number of people who died is equivalent to the total number of public school teachers in the country, or the total number of truck drivers in the country. And both of those statistics for me, like if you say like, 250,000, to me, that's just, I just have a hard time wrapping my head around that number.
Sure.
You're like, oh, this is the equivalent of every single public school. It's like, wow, that is a lot of teachers or a lot of people.
Right. Yeah. So let's get into how you ended up in this job. And starting with fair old Hamilton College. How did you go from Rhode Island? You grew up in Rhode Island. How does one end up going from Rhode Island to tiny little Clinton, New York?
I didn't get into Bowdoin or Middlebury, honestly. I mean, I wish I had a more elevated, lofty reason I could give you, but I was just coming from that New England kind of private school world where everybody's competing to get into the best school they can. And for me, that was Hamilton. I will say I'm a big fan of Clinton, New York. I really love upstate New York. So that was not something I expected, but I actually really came to enjoy the surrounding area.
Did you explore the surrounding area much?
I did. Yeah. This was my weird hobby. And honestly, one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't try. I mean, I wasn't into journalism then. And I wish now that I had done some reporting in the surrounding area, because I think there are really fascinating stories there.
Yeah, I agree.
But I didn't have a car on campus, but during my time at Hamilton was when they started having zip cars. So I would literally just rent a zip car for a couple of hours and just drive around and go to Vernon Center.
Hmm.
or like Sylvan Beach or Oneida or one of those random towns. Or like and even before that, I would like take, there was like the Utica City bus that went to Hamilton.
Hmm.
And I was like the only person I knew who ever just like rode that bus. Like I just would like pay my like 50 cents or whatever, like literally like drop in the coins and just like ride into Utica and just like walk around.
You're probably one of the few people that knew it existed, much less
Oh yeah,
go
I
there.
think so. Yeah, yeah. I never saw another student on there. Sometimes people who worked at the college would be going in the other direction, like people who worked in the dining halls. I'd see
Sure,
them, but it
sure.
was a very empty ride going up College Hill Road on
Yeah,
whatever the Utica Public Transit is called. I think it's like Mohawk Valley
that's
Transit or
fascinating.
something.
Because one of the things that has come up a few times in my conversations for the show, and one of the thoughts I have is, and it's something I
Mhm.
experienced in my 4 years there, is my hypothesis is that the overwhelming majority of students that spend 4 years at that school know little to nothing about the surrounding areas and do
Yeah.
little other than maybe going to the mall or
Mhm.
venturing off campus is literally going down to the VT or the Rock.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and I ended up having a job my senior year in Utica, and
Mhm.
I think maybe stir craziness. Some friends and I would start to venture out into Utica a little bit more, and it's like, oh, there are other restaurants and there are other places you can go, and there's a lot out there, and it's a beautiful part of the country.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah, Utica's a really cool city. And I mean, I'd never been somewhere so rural before because obviously Rhode Island is like very densely populated. I'd been in like rural New England, but not, I don't know, just the rolling hills and just some of the countryside around there. Cause I also did a lot of long distance running while I was there.
Hmm.
So that I guess that was kind of how I got into doing that exploring because I just would be looking for new routes and like I remember just like running out to like Oriskany Falls one day and being like, oh wow, this is like an interesting town with this gravel mill. So
Right, 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 right.
yeah, and just like seeing all the barns and I don't know, I got really obsessed with barns and silos and things like that that were very exotic to me.
A lot of crumpling barns.
Yeah, they're very beautiful when they're crumpling. I hope they're all there and I hope they're all still doing well.
Someone listening to this will send me a note fact checking me on this, but I remember hearing that there was some sort of law that said if some of these old barns you couldn't tear them down, you had to leave them
Hmm.
as is as part of like the historical preservation. But so that's why there were so many crumpled barns. Because we used to drive. I remember I played rugby and we used to drive all through
Yeah.
upstate New York, and any number of these towns you drive through and see all these. And like, why don't they just tear it down if it's going to fall apart like that? And
Hmm.
someone said that's part of it. So I don't know.
I'm skeptical of that explanation. I think it's more that they still serve a purpose and that you can, because like in places where there's preservation laws, you're allowed to fix stuff
Right,
up.
right, right.
Yeah. I don't know. I think it's more like, you know how there'd be like school buses parked at farms a lot because people would buy the old school buses and then just use them to keep like chickens or bales of hay or whatever. I think it's
Sure,
more like
sure.
this might not look great, but it
There's
still
there's
does
some
its
utility
job.
to it
Yeah.
still.
Yeah.
Well, that's why you're a reporter, and I'm asking you
That's why I'm
questions.
a barn expert, actually. I also have no idea what I'm talking about.
If
Somebody
the
will also
Washington Post
fact
ever
check me.
switches to
Yeah,
barn an expose, you're first in line.
I hope so.
So you mentioned something that's interesting to me. You
Hmm.
weren't into journalism when you were in school. So this job isn't something you thought you'd end up doing.
No, I mean, I wish I had because definitely, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stories I could have done when I was in college and certainly classes I could have taken that would have been helpful for me now. But yeah, it wasn't until a few years I kind of ended up, after graduation, I kind of ended up just by accident working in journalism. So I wasn't like, I didn't do any campus publications, anything like that, like
Hmm.
wasn't on the Spectator. Like I didn't even, like, I know there are other people from Hamilton who have gone into journalism, but they weren't even people who I knew like when I was there because it just was totally outside my wheelhouse. I did creative
Interesting.
writing, but I don't know. I thought journalism, I had like a very narrow view where I thought it was kind of this boring thing where you like went to the city council meeting and like asked the city councilmen about like the tax revenue and like, very kind of serious and important but dry kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
I didn't realize that a lot of what I liked to read was also journalism, like just that any kind of nonfiction writing, basically, that's based on fact is
Sure.
based in journalism practices. So I kind of had to, like, after I graduated, I started doing more reading magazine profiles and kind of like more narrative nonfiction books and being like, oh, this is really interesting. I
Hmm.
enjoy this.
Interesting. So you said you got into it by accident. What was the accident?
Yeah, well, so okay, so I was part of like I graduated in 2011, so it's still pretty, I don't know if we were technically in a recession, but it still was very much in that recession era where there weren't a lot of entry level jobs. So I kind of just did random very random jobs, like even just like working for temp agencies and stuff, and tried out a lot of different stuff. I mean, I knew I wanted to do something involving writing, but I also knew I needed to, you know, make some money in the meantime before I went to try and get an MFA and kind of work on a portfolio. So I kind of was just like moving around and also just like trying to see what stuck. And I mean, like I like briefly had a foray into floral design, like managed a yoga studio. Like I worked for the Appalachian Mountain Club for all New Hampshire, like very random. So long story short, eventually I kind of wanted a real job, and I just felt like I knew a lot of people who had gone into some form of marketing. And I was like, okay, that seems like involves some level of writing. I could probably do that.
Mm-hmm.
And in my hometown newspaper had a position for like a marketing assistant opening. So I applied for that and got the job. And while I was working there, well, I mean, first of all, it turned out I was terrible at marketing. I had like no real ideas on how to do that. And it wasn't like I was really doing anything, you know, that advanced anyway. I was basically just kind of like an administrative assistant. But so it was for this kind of family owned, you know, family of publications. And basically I just had all these ideas about stories I thought people should be writing. Because it was, you know, it was my hometown where I'd grown up. I'd spent some time away. I'd come back as an adult, and I just was seeing all stuff where I'd be like, "Oh, this is so interesting! Like, isn't anyone curious about this?" So eventually, one editor who kind of ran was the Free Arts and Culture Weekly just started being like, "Okay, cool. So you're going to write that story." And it only really worked because it was this family-owned publication. Like most newspapers, you have the wall between advertising and editorial where that would never fly. Because I was technically on the advertising side, right? Even though I wasn't selling advertising or dealing with advertisers, like I was on more of the business side of stuff. So usually that would not be okay. But I was doing kind of like nothing that hard-hitting anyway. Like I think probably the first real story I wrote was about like people who had illegal backyard chickens or something like that. But yeah, it turned out that I just really liked, I really liked doing writing, liked doing the reporting, and I was certainly better at it. I mean, it also turned out like I didn't even realize that this was a big deal, but just the fact that I was able to turn stuff in by deadline or even turn it in early and that I could reliably do that made me like extremely in demand.
Huh.
Because I just take that for granted. You know, it's like, of course you have to turn stuff in when it's due. But it turns out that is a thing that many journalists are not so good about, is deadlines. So just by being like, I will consistently make my deadlines, you kind of end up on the top of the pile.
There's something in just about every field. A certain level of competence can put you ahead of many other people. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's probably different if you're in New York or something where you have just like a surplus of very talented people. Mm-hmm. But since it's kind of, you know, a smaller town also, I mean, obviously the other part is being like a recent college graduate who's willing to work for like very minimal amounts of money, you know, which I could do because I was living with my parents and it wasn't even my main source of income at the time. So I would do a lot of work for very little compensation. I was very happy to do it. So yeah, eventually after doing that for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, I eventually just quit the marketing job and just to focus on writing.
Interesting. What was the path from there? What did you start seeking out reporting jobs at various publications?
Well, so I did the whole internship route because I hadn't done like, you know, you're supposed to do the internships right when you're in college on your summers, and I hadn't done any of that.
You need a portfolio of writing, I imagine.
Yeah, right. So I kind of probably didn't, but I did go to New York and it was kind of brutal because everybody else, I felt much older than everybody else and certainly much too old to be an intern and be making so little money. But, you know, I did that to have it on my resume. I mean, and it was also a little frustrating because since I had just been writing articles under my name, you know, and just doing that, to suddenly be like, oh, you're going to be just like running these errands and like helping coordinate this photo shoot is like, I don't really need to be doing this. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I did it for my resume, I guess, and basically eventually ended in getting into Columbia for journalism school. So that's when I started having a real career. Was after
Got it. And how did you feel like your experience at Hamilton prepared you for your Columbia experience?
Yeah, I mean, I also think though that I benefited a lot from having some time in between. Because I think it was probably like 5 years after I graduated. Math. yeah, 4 or 5 years after I graduated that I started at Columbia. And you could really tell a difference in the people in my class because the people who had been out in the working world were so happy to be going back to school. Because once you've been working a 9 to 5 job, like taking classes, like a few hours a day and just kind of getting to do what you want the rest of the time and like actually studying stuff you care about, it's so much fun. Like it feels great.
Hmm.
But part of why I, took some time doing random jobs after Hamilton was I was just kind of burnt out of school at that point. And I just couldn't envision going to grad school right away.
Sure.
I like wanted a
Sure.
break. And I could definitely tell in my class with the people, not everyone, but a lot of people who are coming straight out of undergrad were kind of just not, they kind of just wanted to like have fun living in New York, which is totally understandable, and just
Sure.
explore and have a good time. And I was like, yeah, I'd also already been living there, but I was like, I don't really need to go like to Smorgasbord or whatever that food thing is in Williamsburg. Like I'm going to just focus on my work. So I
Yeah.
did pretty well, but I think definitely I was so much more grateful. I mean, the few years I was out gave me time to be like, wow, I should have taken school more seriously at Hamilton. I should have
Hmm.
been more disciplined in my classes. So I felt kind of like I got a do-over.
And did your time at Columbia, I imagine it did, since you're still doing it, strengthen the idea that was the path you wanted to take?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it was really great. I mean, I basically, yeah, I went there because I had kind of just sort of had to teach myself everything going along. Because one of the problems with how everything in journalism, there have been so many cutbacks, is there kind of is no one who really has time to just teach you the basics like there would have been maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So even though I'd kind of been doing it, I felt like I just didn't really know the basics of how to report. So it was really helpful for me just to take a class that literally was like reporting 101 or photojournalism 101, where they just tell you like, this is what you need to do. And
Hmm.
like, this is how you conduct an interview. And just, yeah, it was a really fun year.
And then where'd you go after school?
After Columbia, so I first did a fellowship at the Miami New Times, which is now weekly down there. And then, so that was 6 months. And then after that ended, I got a job with the Phoenix New Times, which is part of the same company, just their sister paper in Arizona. So I was out there for about 2 years before I went to the Post.
And when you're going from Florida to Arizona, are you starting to feel like, oh my God, I'm going to have to bounce around the country for a while? Or did you feel like you could find a place to settle?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty excited to bounce around the country. I definitely did not want to stay in New York. I was
Uh-huh.
I did feel very much when I was doing internships there, and also when I was at Columbia, just that there was, not that there's anything wrong with New York, but just that there are so many reporters concentrated there who are all covering the same stories, and that there are so many stories outside of New York that no one is covering. So I really just wanted to get out of there and was open to basically anything as long as it was not in New York. So Miami was not a place I had been before, but I was like, okay, sure. Um, and same thing. I mean, when something opened up in Phoenix, it was like, okay, great, it's a job. And I ended up really liking Arizona and the Southwest a lot.
And then you end up at the Washington Post, which is,
Mm-hmm.
legitimate news organization. Are you feeling like, okay, I'm Woodward and Bernstein, here I come. Like I'm going to go make my impact now.
I don't know about that. I mean, it's much more, once you're there, you kind of have to work your way up,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So yeah, but it definitely has been nice. I mean, I really love doing local news, and probably in another era, I could have done that for my entire career. But the reality was, just in the like 2 years I spent all weekly, is just seeing so much get cut from our budgets and so many people get laid off, and just
Yeah.
seeing where the state of local news was at. It was really nice and just honestly like mind-blowing to get to a place that actually has resources to put into reporting,
Mm.
and where you're actually getting paid a fair wage for your work, and actually like getting, I mean, I had never had more than 5 days of time off a year before. So that was really huge. But even just being like, oh, there's enough reporters' notebooks in the supply closet to go around. And like our computers work all the time. Like I had very low standards. So, I mean,
Interesting.
I was literally texting some of my other friends at local outlets about like, I was like sending them pictures from the bathroom. I was like, look at this, there's hand lotion, not just soap. Pretty
That's
sad.
very funny. Does even from the time you started coming out of college until now, the media world has evolved, and it just continues to evolve, and to the point where, there was a time when being a reporter at the Washington Post, I imagine, just meant you handed in your copy and it got printed in the newspaper and you were done. But now it's multimedia, and you have to think about how this is going to live in different channels. Does that factor into your work? Do you have to stress about, how's this going to play in, on Twitter versus how it's going to play online versus in print?
Yeah, I mean, since I've been at the Post, pretty much everything I've done has been for online, and I am certainly someone who reads online, so I kind of almost don't really think about print. And then
Right.
Sometimes you'll see an email from something like, "Oh, we're going to use this in print," and then that's great and exciting. And it is really interesting, also. Just the people you hear from the reader emails you get, how different they can be, and how you can kind of tell when they saw the print article versus read something online.
And then are you aware? I mean, do you get pressure on what the traffic is online to anything you're publishing? I mean, does that factor into your work?
I wouldn't say pressure, but we definitely think about it. I mean, so what I'm doing now with the live updates file, that gets a ton of readers constantly because
Sure.
people are just going to see the latest news. So the individual updates we're doing, we're not really thinking about, is this going to be, driving traffic or not? But when I was doing before this, I was doing more of kind of a general assignment type position. And for that, definitely, I mean, if there's something you really care about and are really passionate about, you can make the case for it, even if you don't think it's going to get readers. And sometimes it's very surprising. And I kind of learned just that if I cared about something, I had to just make that case, because I might think like, oh no, but like, this is too weird. This is too random. Nobody is going to care about this. And then that piece would end up getting a ton of readers. So it's definitely a consideration, but I think the reality is that nobody in the newspaper business knows what is going to get a lot of readers. Like none of us know. Sometimes you think something's a sure thing and it doesn't go that way at all. So you can't be totally making calculations based on that.
Interesting. So for a current student who is staying up late night, laying out the Spectator every week, wanting to have your job in a few years, who's hearing you say that you didn't even write for the Spectator when you were there, what's your advice to someone who wants to break into journalism?
Well, they should go to Utica, first of all. They really should, because the Utica Observer Dispatch has not very many people working there anymore. And I guarantee there's a lot of stories there that are uncovered or undercovered. And I mean, it has been really interesting to see, actually, this one thing with COVID, particularly, how many stories have been broken by college newspapers, because local newspapers just don't have the resources and are basically overwhelmed to cover just the basics of what is going on. And then you have student papers where they don't have these financial constraints. They have a lot of students, and, they have, what's going on their campus is like a major, sometimes there'll be like a major outbreak and they'll get to the bottom of it. Or sometimes they'll, get the emails that show what the college president was actually saying while they were saying another thing. So that's been really interesting to see. And I do think it's unfortunate that we're at this place, but it is an exciting time to be doing college reporting, probably in a way that I think maybe it wasn't when I was in school. I would also, I mean, it's tough because even the paper I was mentioning that I started out at, that was just like a free kind of almost all weekly style paper here in Rhode Island, that doesn't even exist anymore. I mean, that's less than a decade ago, and already the paper where I got my start is not around. So it's very hard to give any kind of helpful advice. I mean, I still do think that local news is a really great place to start out, because you have so many more opportunities to do so much more. I mean, if you're working in a small place that's understaffed, they will just throw anything and everything at you. And basically say yes to anything you pitch because they need to fill the pages.
Interesting.
So I think you can get a lot more practical experience there in a lot shorter amount of time than you would if you're interning at, some huge publication major city and kind of trying to work your way up. But even those positions, even those internships are getting few and far between. So yeah. It's tough. I mean, I almost recommend, if there's anything else you think you might want to do, probably give that a try first. I'm not saying don't go into journalism, but I'm just saying, if there's something else that you also enjoy and are passionate about that will give you financial stability and, you know, faith that you'll have a job in the next 10 years, maybe you should try that.
Huh. What's something about the job that, what's a misconception about the job, I guess is the question.
I have to say, I'm amazed by how many people don't know um, just how many ethics policies we have. Like, I've had friends who have asked me to help to donate to campaigns, for instance, or to volunteer in phone bank, and I'm like, I can't do that. Like, I can't do any kind of political advocacy in any forms. I mean, I can't even have a sign, with any kind of political message outside my house. I mean, with all this stuff, I mean, even donating to, I mean, I couldn't donate to charity, for instance, if there's anything I might potentially cover, like I could do like volunteer work or donate money for something kind of non-controversial, like a food bank or something like that's probably fine, but if it's going to intersect with what you're covering in any way, you can't do that. And a lot of that does really come as a surprise to people.
Interesting. And then how do you deal with managing through that while also, if you spend a minute on Twitter or a minute in social media reading, an absurd amount of people calling you fake news and trashing places like the Washington Post, you're managing through things like that people don't possibly know about of all these ethics that you have to follow, these ethical rules that you have to follow, while then also being called by so many people, biased and fake. Does that drive you absolutely bonkers?
No, I mean, I also think I'm pretty immune to it at this point. I mean, I stopped reading comments a long time ago. I stopped like Twitter searching my stories a long time ago. I
Smart.
do. Yeah. So the only way that I really hear is if I get emails directly to my inbox, which is one thing that has been a change from going from smaller papers to the Post is just the volume of email you get is so much more insane, but which makes it a lot more easier just to be like, delete, 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 So
and that's from just readers.
Yeah, reader emails. Yeah. Well, also, I mean, from, PR people, everything. But yes, the amount of reader email is certainly a lot higher. And certainly, you got like the COVID truthers, for instance. I mean, that's probably the main people who send me emails I delete now. I mean, so I just give something a 1-second glance because we do need to kind of look at it just in case there's like, like a threat or anything, you kind of have to know about that and deal with it. But yeah, if somebody's saying something nice, I want to know it right back and say thank you. But otherwise, yeah, just delete, move on. My brain does not even process it.
Well, that's good. That's good. I don't think that's not an easy thing to do. Just human nature is to want to know what people are thinking and say about you. So it takes some discipline to close that out. So good for you.
Yeah, I mean, my other secret is like if somebody sends me a very nice email, I have my nice folder in Outlook where I archive all of them, so I can all just like go in the nice Outlook folder and be like, oh, look at all these people who like me.
You need a boost. Yeah, go in there on a day.
I actually haven't had to like dig into that, but it's just nice to know it exists.
There you go. It's good to have. It's like a security blanket. All right, I like that. Good.
Yeah,
smart. So if you look back from your time wandering the hills of upstate New York to where you are now, is there anything you wish you had known?
Oh, I mean, there's so many things. I mean, I kind of wish I had just taken college and school a little bit more seriously. I wish I'd known what I was going to do so I could, kind of be more career oriented or even just remotely career oriented. But I guess everything's also worked out okay for me.
Right.
So
Right.
It wasn't too big a loss.
Were you, I mean, I think you just said it, but were you focused or worried at all during those 4 years of what the job is going to be? I think
I mean, I should have been. I absolutely, I should have like really. I mean, I think I almost had sort of an old fashioned sense of, the way it used to be for like, I don't know, boomers or Gen Xers. I don't even know when this stopped being a thing, but that you can get like your liberal arts degree and then just kind of show up to, I don't know, the New Yorker or something and be like, hello, I am here with my history degree from Amherst College and I would like a job at your fine publication. And they're like, okay, great. Would you like to go to Iraq next week? Which is like it has not been the case for my generation. I don't know when that stopped.
Right.
So I mean, majoring in classics, I kind of was just like, oh, okay, so I'll just go to law school and become a lawyer. And I didn't really think about if I wanted to be a lawyer, and like even what that would entail. But it just was like, oh, well, that's a thing people with classics degrees do.
Mm, mm.
Along the way, I kind of abandoned that and was like, I'm just going to write things somehow and it will work itself out.
Well, it seems like it's working out for you so far.
Yeah, I mean, there also was a period where I worked like as a temporary receptionist in Eugene, Oregon, and just like rode the bus around to buy like discount groceries and lived a really bleak lifestyle. So, there were rough patches, but yeah, long term, yeah, it's been okay.
What should we be paying attention to with this COVID thing?
Okay, let me think of this one. I don't know if this is really, I mean, I think one of the main things that occurs to me is just I've seen a lot of different statistics pointing to how I think it's what they call like maybe like a K-shaped recovery or something.
Yep.
But
Yep.
basically how people have had such different experiences. You have people, I mean, people like me who have gotten to just work from home for a little while on their couch and have kept their jobs and fared basically okay, and maybe had some like mild inconveniences at best. And people who are in just such dire financial straits. And I do feel kind of like the economic side is one that tends to maybe get less attention or get talked about less. I think just because a lot of us don't come in contact with them until you just see on TV, like the footage of the long lines of cars at food banks.
Right.
So I definitely, I guess that's something where I'm just really curious to see what the long-term repercussions will be.
And then presumably, and God willing, there will be a vaccine shortly, and then this thing will start to fade, and we'll get to some back to normal, depending on what the long-term ramification is. But there won't be a need for daily coverage of this anymore. What becomes of you? What do you think is on the horizon for you?
That's a great question. I'd love to know the answer for that. I mean, I don't even know, how long we'll still have the daily coverage and how long they'll make sense. I mean, I imagine, certainly the vaccine rollout and everything that goes with that, could last for a while. But yeah, I am waiting to find that out. I'm very curious to also know the answer.
Any wishes, any hopes on what would be next for you?
I mean, I really struggle with this because I have generally been more of a generalist. And, part of why I like working for small papers is you're kind of covering a bit of everything. And my job before was kind of also covering a bit of everything. And now I've been on this one focus beat for a while. And I'm understanding like, oh, it's really nice just to have one subject that you get to know reasonably well and that you kind of can recognize, oh, this is a significant development because of this thing that happened 3 months ago, and have this whole body of background knowledge as opposed to starting from scratch every single time and trying to learn everything about a subject in like a few hours, which is what I usually have to do. So I think it would be nice. I have never really succeeded finding a specialty in terms of my area of coverage, but it'd be nice to have one.
All right. Well, then or you'll just go on to something new, and you'll just add to the experience, right?
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
awesome.
the learning all about subject in like 4 hours is kind of fun.
All right, that's Antonia Farzan, class of 2011. It keeps coming up in these conversations, but there is not one path. I came in expecting to trade war stories about working at The Spectator with someone who is a reporter for a daily newspaper. And it turns out, no. Never did anything for The Spec, never thought she'd be in journalism. Took a completely different path. It's fascinating. On the barn thing that we talked about, I did come across a Utica Observer-Dispatch article from 2013, I think it was, that said that it's incredibly difficult to get proper funding and grants from the Historical Society or to be deemed a historical site, which would allow farmers to maintain old barns. So if they aren't able to get any kind of grant or funding to treat it as a historical site, then it just becomes easier from a financial standpoint to just let it crumble. So there you go. I knew someone was going to fact check me on it, so I fact checked myself and looked it up. The curious Hamilton mind at work right there, folks. My thanks to Antonia for joining this week. Enjoyed talking to her. You have been listening to Had I Known on WHCL-FM, Clinton, New York. HadIKnown.buzzsprout.com, at Had I Known Show on social media. As always, my thanks to Dr. Michael Woods for supplying all the music on this show. And as always, he's playing now, but he's not going to play us out. As I mentioned at the beginning, a new feature, we're going to start to showcase music from around the Hamilton community. And first up is a current student, Ben Leit, class of 2022, and his latest single, Next Year. You can check out all his music on Spotify. Again, Ben Leit, Leit. We'll have a link in the show notes, and we'll share it out on social media, but you don't have to go there right now. Right now, you can listen to the song, Next Year by Ben Leit, class of 2022. Hope you enjoyed the show. We'll talk to you next week.
Do you still miss me? Even when you are annoyed? Could I scare you away? Make you jump overboard? Would you say I'm what you want? Nothing less and nothing more. Will you love me anyway? Will you love me anymore? Can you tell me that you'll love me next year? Reassure me that you'll still be here. Just let me know just what you're waiting for. Honey, please don't go. Don't shake me to my core. Can you tell me that you'll love me next year? Reassure me that you'll still hold me dear, dear.
Had I Known podcast show on your radio or take it to go.